Welcome to the Denverse. I'm Derek Kessinger, and today we have Cole Hamilton on to talk about the Colorado Avalanche, who made a few moves today.
Good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. It was hard to track him down. I had to go over to his house and convince him to come on to the podcast.
Yeah, that whole flight of stairs you had to walk.
So the Avs, today was the first day of free agency for the Colorado Avalanche. They came in hoping for a top-tier forward, and it looked like they weren't going to get that. And by the end of the day, did they get a top-tier forward?
Yeah, I would say so. Walking out of the day with, if you'd told me they were going to leave today with Nazem Kadri on the roster, I would have been all about that, and I would have probably assumed right away that they were going to give up Tyson Barrie to do it. They gave up a little more than that, so we'll get to all that. But the goal was to shore up the second line, and if you're looking at this team now and assuming that it's going to be Nazem Kadri and then Jonas Donskoy, who they added in free agency, and then one of either Burakovsky, who they made the trade for last week, or Tyson Jost. Yeah, that's a real improvement over what they had last year. But you've eaten away at some other parts of your roster, so I don't know.
So just to get everyone up to speed, the Avs at the end of the day traded Alexander Kerfoot and Tyson Barrie for Nazem Kadri and Cale Rosen.
I think it's Callie.
Okay.
But I'm not totally sure because he hasn't really done enough to earn getting that name right yet at this point in his career, right? There are a couple picks in there too. Like they move up from that Colorado moves up from. They give away their own 6th rounder, and they move up with Toronto's 3rd rounder. So that replaces the 3rd rounder that they traded away in the Burakovsky trade that they got in the Soderberg trade. So they've been moving 3rd rounders all week, but they finished the week with one again. So they'll have their 1st and Toronto's 3rd, and no 2nd this coming year.
So obviously this trade came down, and I think my initial reaction was that's a lot to give up for a guy who's coming in here who has done well at times. I think he's a good player, but it sort of seemed like they were going for a plan where they were going to let some of the top young guys play, and then suddenly they completely changed that. And they gave up Barrie, who I think, if it was 1-for-1, this was the kind of 1-for-1 I think we talked about at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked about specifically these two guys as a potential, would this make sense? Yeah, Barrie makes sense in Toronto. And I love the guy. I think individually he's a great fit. And, he had a down year this last year, but the role changed significantly for him when Toronto added John Tavares. This guy went from being their 2C to being their 3C and not playing a whole lot, not playing power play really anymore. It was a big change, but before that, back-to-back 30-goal seasons, a guy who, has been putting up 50, 60 points pretty consistently in his NHL career. Like, I really like the fit that way. I mean, he just brings a different dimension to the Avs that they don't have elsewhere. He's like a real sandpaper guy. He's a real competitor. They've been accused at times unfairly and at times fairly of being a little bit soft, and that's not what Kadri is for sure. So I like all that piece of it. It's just the value on the trade, I think, for me that was surprising and that I'm still trying to wrestle with. I think it's a simplistic way to look at it, but you're looking at Tyson Barrie was producing 50, 60 points for you every year. Alex Kerfoot producing 40 points for you in his 2 seasons so far. Kerfoot, an RFA, he's on a cheap deal. Well, he was going to get re-signed here, and he's cost controlled, so that deal's probably going to be pretty cheap for you. And you give both of those guys away, that's a lot of production to replace. And if you're hoping to count on Kadri for 50, 60 points, that's great, but that's a lot of production going the other way. Now, Barrie, last year of the deal, I get it. There's a reason we've talked forever about a potential Tyson Barrie trade. It seemed hard for them to keep him, but I would have thought even as a 1-year rental, that the value was going to be a little bit higher there. Doesn't feel to me like the difference between Kerfoot and Kadri is Tyson Barrie.
Yeah.
Is I guess what it comes down to.
No, I mean, that completely makes sense. Obviously, we thought this was a move they were going to have to make because they have too many defensemen right now. And there was the news that Cole's going to be out earlier in the week, which led to some of these trades.
Yep.
But I think that the overall way that you look at it is they're betting on the future of Byram, Makar, and Girard. And I mean, it's clear Makar can play at that level now. Girard, I think we've wanted more points from him. Haven't seen that yet.
Yep.
And we don't know if Byram's going to make the team this year or not.
Oh man, he's going to get 9 games. I would bet at this point because, they're betting on the future of this Avs D for sure. Because you look at it right now and if you were mocking up that top 6 the other day and trying to figure out your D pairings just a couple days ago with Barrie in there, man, it was looking pretty mean. And now it's a lot of potential. It's a lot of future. It's a lot of guys that like you're excited about in the long term. But with Cole out till December, Eric Johnson, has the shoulder. I would expect, based on how other guys recover from that he'll probably be good to go for the beginning of the season. But you never know. Say both of those guys are out, you're suddenly looking at your top 3 defensemen are Cale Makar, Sam Girard, and Nikita Zadorov, with like Zadorov at 24 as the elder statesman there, and the group doesn't really get more impressive after that. They brought in Calle Rosen, they've got Kevin Connaughton from the Soderberg trade, Mark Barbario's still hanging around on a contract if he's healthy. Ryan Graves, who had a couple games last year that looked pretty good, and then the potential that you've got Bowen Byram coming, but that's got to be the youngest D core in the league by a mile, the least experienced D group by a mile. In a way, it's like a coach's nightmare. You can just imagine a coach walking out and trying to think that they have to play these 6 guys together with, combined 300 games experience or something. So I don't know what's going to happen there. It looks great in the long run. You still have guys like Timmins and Milosh out there, and the kid Hellison that they drafted this year. It looks great in the long run, but losing Barrie in the short term is a really tough pill to swallow.
Well, sort of turning to how this affects the Avs now, there were a lot of moves this week. I think more than we thought.
Oh, yeah.
We thought they were going to bring in a couple guys. Obviously, they traded Soderberg away and then brought in Burakovsky. Those weren't, the same move, but that's sort of where they were on the forward front.
They were so close together, too. It's almost like a three-way trade. They were clearly linked.
But then you come into today and you're like, it looks like the Avs are going to get 2 forwards. That was sort of how it looked, I think, that they were going to do that. They brought in 4 forwards, including re-signing Colin Wilson today. They had Donskoy, Bellemare, and Kadri. So this completely changes the way that you look at how this team is built next year. Do you think all 4 of those guys are playing at the beginning of the year, on the roster? And so does that push out, Kamenev's definitely not playing now if they all make the team, right?
I would. I'm just looking at this now, and this is the first time I've actually looked at the ages. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is the only forward on the roster who is 30.
Oh man,
he's 34, which is ridiculous. I would expect all those guys to play for sure, except for Bellemare. If I'm rolling, if I had to bet today, I'm gonna bet that he's probably gonna play just because NHL coaches like experience. He's a decent penalty killer, and they wouldn't have given him almost $2 million a year for 2 years to be their 13th forward. If that's what they have in mind for him. Now, looking at the roster myself, I believe he should be the 13th guy, probably. I would rather see Vladislav Kamenev taking those minutes at the beginning of the year. There's always injuries. There's always stuff that can happen. So that could still be the case, and you have both those guys in your lineup. But that was the one that is weird to me. Like I said, he's a fine penalty killer. He's well liked in locker rooms. But, the guy's putting up 6 goals and 15 points a year every year. It's like, if you don't feel like you can get that from your own system, what are we doing here?
Well, I mean, and that's sort of where it looked to me when you're looking at this. Not only do you have Kamenev, but O'Connor played, a little bit. It looked like he might play a little more. Greer, doesn't seem like there's a spot for him. And then the next tier of guys with Bowers and Kaut, where do they fit into the plan right now?
Well, I don't have a problem with the idea that Shane Bowers and Martin Kaut spend this year in the AHL. And you have some room if Martin Kaut goes down and he's just ripping up the AHL this year and you need to find a spot for him, they can do that. Like Colin Wilson, they're bringing back on that $2.6 million deal. It's 1 year. If they want to move him mid-year for something, they can do that. If they need to move, a Matt Nieto to make a spot for Kaut, they can do that. There's options for them there. The Greer thing is hard because he is going to be waiver eligible this year. And he had a good enough AHL season last year that I do think I think it would be hard for Colorado to get him through waivers and keep him. So that's a guy who you have to make a decision on and keep him on your NHL roster. And when you have Bellemare there and you've got Kamenev here, that makes it hard. Are you going to run 14 forwards? That's something that or on your roster. That's something they haven't wanted to carry that extra guy. That would be something new for them. So I don't know how they're going to handle that, but it certainly to me looks like they are probably done with AJ Greer and giving him a shot. I think they've kind of written that off.
Well, and I mean it's frustrating because there were he didn't get to play that much. But there were games where it looked like he was playing well enough to get more minutes last year, especially during the middle of the season where they were having all those injuries. Nothing was working, and it was just move him up to one of the top 2 lines and see what happens. And now it's looking like that's not going to happen. And I think that to me is the frustration with everything that happened today. And I said this on Twitter, and no one really seemed to understand what I was saying. But they haven't proven that they're willing to elevate the younger guys if they're playing better than the veterans. And that's what's so frustrating to me about a lot of the lesser moves of today.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not there are some people who are higher on AJ Greer than I am. I'm not banging down the door for this guy to be in their top 6 or even their top 9. I'm not, I don't think he's going to be some massive NHL contributor. He has played 37 games at this point. He's got 1 goal, 6 points to show for it, and that's not great. Now, sure, he hasn't had a lot of opportunity. He's played crummy minutes. There are problems there. But the guy put up 44 points in 54 AHL games last year. You don't think he can do what they're going to pay Bellemare almost $2 million to do? That's where I have an issue. And you're committing 2 years to this guy. You don't commit term to guys like that who are ultimately completely replaceable. It starts to add up. Almost $3 million on Matt Calvert, almost 2 on Bellemare, another 2 on Matt Nieto, another 2.6 on Colin Wilson. You're getting into territory here where that's a really good player if you spend that money on a really good player. And that's what the Avs refused to go out and do today. They added around the margins. They kind of blocked the path for guys like Greer and Kaut, and they committed money and term to bleh.
Well, the one thing that I'm excited about is I think this gives them the dual threat of 2 lines that are going to be. And that's exciting because, I mean, especially being an Avs fan and growing up on the Sakic-Forsberg dual threat, having the McKinnon-Rantanen first line and the Landeskog-Kadri second line is exciting, and I think is going to – just that alone will make the Avs better next year.
It's easy to poo-poo this because it's hard to lose Tyson Barrie because he was a dynamic and one-of-a-kind guy. I mean, the all-time leading scorer for Avs D. So it's hard to watch that go. But, man, Nazem Kadri is good, and he is a good fit. I was trying to think about how these lines are going to look because man, that's a big mystery to me. There are a bunch of moving parts here. There's some guys who have some flexibility in terms of position, and I wrote up a couple different versions of it. And at one point, I wound up with this second line of Gabe Landeskog, Nazem Kadri, and Jonas Donskoy on the right, and that is a nightmare for any other team's group of forwards or their group of D. Like, that line is going to forecheck you and like put you down on your butt in the corner. That's a tough line that is super responsible both ways. That's going to score some goals. I mean, that's got to be the best second line they've had at least since 2013, when they were just running the stacked forward group with no defense.
And I think that's the other thing to think about this. If they hadn't re-signed Barrie this year and he'd gone into it, and they somehow lost him like they lost Stastny, this is still better than that.
Oh, absolutely.
But I do wonder, they had all of the room in the world. Like, if for some reason Rantanen holds out, which I don't think he's going to, they're going to be close to the floor to start the season. Like, that's where their salary situation is right now. I don't clearly they won't, but they have so much room. I think if they had re-signed Barrie, they definitely could have gotten a better deal than this. And I think that's the other frustrating thing, because they had the room.
Yeah, I mean, those sign-in trades are rare in the NHL. So I go back and forth on that. They retained, I think one thing they did well, they retained the 50% salary on Barrie. I'm sure that mattered to Toronto. I guess that must have mattered in the value of what they got back. I can't imagine, I don't think the value was very good, so I can't imagine what they were going to get if they didn't retain. So, good on them for doing that, for paying the money to make that happen. I don't know that Toronto can keep him or what that situation is going to look like. That'll be interesting. But looking at it right now, they've got $54 million committed today, almost 54.5. We're looking at an 81.5 cap, so they've still got 27 in space. You got to do Rantanen. You figure that's going to be at most 10.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have said higher maybe earlier this week, but that Timo Meier deal for 4x6 is pretty good for Colorado. And then you've got Andre Burakovsky is going to be another 3 because he's got that high QO. JT Compher somewhere in the 3 range. Kamenev, 1 something, his qualifying offer. And then Nikita Zadorov, 3-4. So you're going to spend not a lot of that cap space. They're going to have a lot of space left. But and not Panarin space anymore, right? Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other path to go down. But this is what happens when you go out and you get a bunch of guys in that $2 to $4 million range. It adds up quick, and it adds up quicker there than it does when you spend $12 million on one really good cap.
And I mean, if it turns out that all of their young players are stars and they win a Stanley Cup, and then you want this cap flexibility, because that's the thing that we've seen teams struggle with to get there, like Chicago and all that. But they're not there yet. We're one game away from the Western Conference Finals, but there's no guarantee that they'll be back in that place next year with how fluid things are and how good the Central is going to be again.
Oh, man. That's where, in a vacuum, I can look at what the Avs did today and go, okay, I can square it. I can see where it makes sense for what they want to do in the future. I can get behind a lot of it. I don't like the value on the Barrie thing. There's no reason for me to like the Bellemare deal. I just don't like it. Everything else, okay, I can see some value there. But man, when you look at what the rest of their division has done, that's where I start to get worried. You see a lot of people today making fun of teams like the Stars for committing money in term to older guys, and yeah, it might hurt Dallas 3 years from now. When it's not going to hurt Dallas? Next year. That team is going to be rock solid. Adding Joe Pavelski to that team is not insignificant. So I worry a little bit. like adding Joe Pavelski, adding Corey Perry, those are good buys for them in the short term. And then you look at Chicago is I think where I really have the most concern. It's a team that wasn't far back of Colorado. They didn't stay out of the playoffs by much. They jumped them in the draft, so they're getting Kirby Dach. As excited as we are about Bowen Byram, like they're getting Kirby Dach. They went out and traded for Calvin Dawn, who's awesome. Olimata, who's not, but improves their D. And then, they have that Dylan Strome addition from late in the year last year who totally turned around that forward group. I mean, that's a scary group. And then when you add Robin Lehner into it in net, they might have answered their biggest question. Like I wouldn't say looking today that the playoffs are a guarantee for Colorado at all. And I think if you and I had talked 2 weeks ago looking at the guys that were available in free agency and the cap space that Colorado had, we would have been saying the expectation is that Colorado needs to be competing for like the division title, not can they squeak in. And that's kind of where I'm at today.
And, I mean, it would be great if you were like, Nashville's falling off, but Duchesne is going to add someone.
Right.
Like, it wasn't because they have the defensemen. They don't probably have their best defenseman anymore, but they still have a strong defense.
Yep.
And you look at what the Coyotes did bringing in Kessel, like that's a better team.
And Carl Soderberg.
And Carl Soderberg, who was the reason the Avs made the playoffs. Like, if he doesn't have the February, March that he had, the Avs don't make the playoffs.
Oh, no, not
like,
at all.
he kept them on life support.
Well, actually, the two players there in that stretch were Carl Soderberg and Tyson Barrie, who revived that team as in that little stretch of the season where things were so hard.
And so I think that's the main concern. And I mean, the other big thing is if Grubauer is just great, like if it turns out that he just needed time to adjust, then they're fine.
Yep.
If it's that he's a streaky goaltender and he's never gotten the chance to play, then they're in trouble.
That's the thing that I think is scariest to me at this point. And I have a lot of faith in Philip Grubauer. I really like him. And I liked him before the Avs got him. But yeah, this is a big step forward to have him be the starter full time, and less than just that. It's like there's no safety net here. Pavel Francouz had a great AHL season. That dude has never started an NHL game, and that's their backup. And they haven't, Joe Sakic, I think today talked about going out to get a third goalie to share time with Adam Werner and in Loveland, but they went out and signed Hunter Miska. I don't know if that's going to be their guy to an AHL deal, and that's another totally unproven guy without a big track record for success. So my bigger concern is not like, can Grubauer handle the starter load? Because I feel like he can. It's what happens if that guy pulls a groin or breaks his foot or whatever. Like, they're one pretty minor injury to a goaltender away from like real trouble potentially.
Well, and I mean, this goes back to the Avs not trusting their young guys, but they were a disaster in goaltender for 2 months and still never let Francouz start. And on the other end of it, St. Louis was playing their fifth goaltender who ended up winning them the Stanley Cup. Like, that's and I'm not saying, like, I don't think he was going to do that, but you're not trusting your young guys.
Yeah.
And you're not trusting him.
Wouldn't you feel better today if, and I wasn't at the time, didn't have a big problem with the decision they made on playing Francouz, but wouldn't you feel better today if you knew a little more about what that guy looks like in the NHL?
And I think that to me is the problem with not playing the young players. Like, I think some of these guys, they could have gotten out, or some of them, but at some point you may have to make a trade to get somebody better. And do you actually know what you're giving up if you never give them the NHL minutes to figure it out?
No, I mean, because if they lose a guy like AJ Greer right now on waivers, right? Or they throw him into some other deal because they're afraid of losing him on waivers, you don't know what you have in that guy. And sure, there's a good chance you didn't have anything in him, and he goes off to the next team, and he still doesn't figure it out, right? We've watched that happen with Chris Bigras, unfortunately, after the concussion, right? We've watched that happen with plenty of other guys in the Avs system. But they're entering this window where you have to make that change. Like Nick Malash has done pretty much everything that they've asked of him in terms of development, in terms of like a nice professional growth curve. And that guy's 21 now. It's getting to be time to give that guy a shot. And instead, they're out there adding Calle Rosen and Kevin Connaughton and all these guys that like don't move the needle for you at all, but make it a lot harder for a guy like that to get into your lineup. So, I mean, I'm with you. It's like you have to walk the walk when it comes to drafting and developing. And a lot of people will look at this and say, "Oh yeah, they got like what did Colorado do today? They held true to what they've been saying. They got younger, faster, right?" And sure, they did. A lot of these guys are young. Like Donskoy totally fits that MO. Nazem Kadri, I would say, fits that MO. But Andre Burakovsky, sure, he does too. But you want to do that from within your own organization.
And if you don't have it, then get rid of the guys.
Right.
Then this is the most value they're ever going to have. If they really don't have the value that you've been saying they have and that other people think they have, this is when you get rid of them. So then they're not a mistake in your organization.
Right.
So that's the...
Figure out what these guys are.
Yeah. So I think... So at the end of the day, do you think the Avs are a better team now than they were at the end of the season?
Ooh. Man, that's hard. I do not. I think they're a better team than they started last year, than last October. But they already had Cale Makar at the end of last season, right? And that's the biggest addition here. So I think, I think they have the potential to be a better team a year from now. But I don't know that they're a better team right now. I think they answered a lot of questions about that second line. I think the forward depth, I think Nazem Kadri makes a big difference. I really like Jonas Donskoy. I think that group looks poised to do something, and I do feel like we're scratching the surface on Tyson Jost, and there's a lot more there. So I feel pretty good about the forward group. And the D group has a lot of potential, but I just think that hole is too big for Cale Makar to fill in 1 year. The guy has 10 games in his NHL career, and they were awesome, and he looked great, but he is going to have growing pains. He is going to have slip-ups. He's, I don't think anybody should be expecting that guy to come in and replace 60 points for Tyson Barrie. So I think they've lost something there. I think there's a lot of potential on D, but there's going to be some hurting back there in the short term while they figure this out, because Cale Makar and Bowen Byram are not ready to take up that top pairing mantle today. And we all hope they will be soon, but not today. And behind them, the goaltending has gotten maybe not worse, but certainly riskier. And so I'm not willing to say today that I think they're better than they were in the playoffs. It's a wash for me.
Well, thanks for coming on. We'll definitely do this a lot more.
Absolutely, man.
Quinn has disappeared, so I don't know where he is. So eventually we'll talk about the Nuggets, but I don't know where he's gone. So come back, Quinn. Thanks for listening to the Denverse.
Come back, Quinn.